Uh, Now, you know the funny part about Harvard educated kids and Princeton educated kids is back in 1986, all of them wanted the Electoral College removed off Harvard and mainly Harvard and Princeton because no one was graduating out of these schools. And a lot of these people were going for, master's degrees in business and whatnot, but they couldn't cut it in the writing courses for these schools. They kept flunking English, the math, they kept flunking math and whatnot, and coming up with ideas with stuff. They had a hard time. So they wanted me to get rid of the Electoral College out of Harvard and Princeton and any school that had a master's course in it. So it tells you something about people in California, New York, and Florida. I mean, you guys couldn't pass a simple bar exam on the lawyer's test. I mean, that's pretty sad. You got an MBA, a military basic adoration. It's either adoration or athlete, but so you're military based. Whippy, who cares? It's supposed to be a master's, bachelor's association. You can't have an MBA unless you graduate with high-end honors, and normally you don't get into an MBA unless you have high-end honors. That means you have to graduate, and I'm not even going to say that word that they like to say. Sounds like some type of copulation that they're doing to get into their MBA. But the interesting part of it is all these Harvard grads, Harvard don't mean nothing anymore. I mean, Harvard is probably just like every other vocational school or every other college, every other university. They're not an elite association anymore. They're not an elite college anymore. A lot of people said Harvard got trashy and dumpy and everything. Well, look at the idiots that they passed through Harvard. Mommy and daddy has to pay $40,000 to get you an A in English, or they have to pay a $20,000 to get you a B in science because you dumbass, or you can't actually come up with anything that good. It's like, oh, I wrote my puppet bit me, but something like that. And yes, I was referring to my butt when I said ASS. But anyway, I mean, hopefully, you guys actually learned something. I mean, I know there's a ton of marijuana on campus in Harvard. I know there's a ton of marijuana on campus with Princeton. I mean, Texas State University, you know how they get those cowgirls to dance and pop out and give them a joint or some ecstasy. That's flooding down there so hard that it's ridiculous. The other part of it is special treatment and all that for little Harvard boys or Harvard girls. The guy that founded Harvard is the guy that's actually talking. It's not a school that is easy. It's never made to be easy. It is a high-rate professional school. But then again, I mean, since Hillary and Bush and Clinton and Reagan, took over, apparently they couldn't cut it either there. So, what was it? Most graduates out of Harvard in 1980 were a C plus to C minus because they couldn't handle the educational level of the studies. And that's actually the funny part because those studies were so freaking easy. That is ridiculous. And Harvard and Princeton. I didn't say anything hard about them, but then again, You got your crybabies out on the West Coast, and you got your crybabies on the East Coast, who can't cut, the fact that they're not very intelligent. And a lot of times when you see a really hot girl go with one of these guys, she's probably looking for the biggest idiot that came out of Harvard, because probably the guy might make money if he lies a lot or anything like that. But when you start looking at certain things, you kind of ask yourself a question. You sit down, and these guys, they talk, and they'll talk straight out from themselves to someone else, or to just straight out from themselves. And the reason for it is because they're not really listening to you, because they think they're so proud about their pride gets in their way. Oh, I'm right. Dude, let me put it this way. Yahoo CEO, Marissa, I really hope she doesn't have a master's degree, because she almost bankrupted Dell. Now she's going after Yahoo, and ever since she took over Yahoo, it's been one buggy network after another. Email scams, people losing emails, up in security on Yahoo, instability within its own security of its passwords. Because one of my accounts on there, I have, if you can't get to the cell phone, meaning that, let's say you change your cell phone. Okay, so you go to AT&T and you change your cell phone, brand new number. You're getting bugged by a few people that you don't want to get bugged by. So you change your phone number, and the security questions are there for a particular reason. So you can actually dodge the phone number. That way you can get back into your account. You can put your brand new phone number from whatever cell phone provider or landline provider, and then go back about your business using your cell phone to get your verification codes. With that said, if you ever try to get into Yahoo, that option does not come up right away. They want you to use another email account, or they want you to use a phone number, or they want you to use, what was the other one? Actually, that's it. But they don't really want to promote the security questions. But the question of it is, does Yahoo have the authority to actually be able to use email servers? And once again, Yahoo, Google, none of these are network authorities. And when we talk about network authorities, it means that they're very limited on what they can do and how they can restrict people on a network, because they do not own most of their network. Yahoo, Google may come out and say, oh, we own all these servers. And, well, really? Then why are they licensed in someone else's name if you own those servers? Same thing with Yahoo, same thing with Firefox, which is more of a browser than not really a network, which we'll get into the programming side of things. How can they, like Android's an open-faced application, or OS as they refer to it, and they're like, okay, how do they get away with that? Because law requires an OS to be a sealed OS to try to become eligible for internet service providing as an OS. Android is another one. Apple's another one. Apple's a little bit more sealed up than Android, and Windows. It's almost sealed up. It's like 3/4 or 7/8 of the way sealed up. But as far as Bill Gates, he never really listened about how to seal an OS up so that people can't get into it. And now, since they want everyone to do it yourself, so they can up the rates and how much, when you send your laptop back for any type of support from hardware to software, you get that $800 bill. That's just flat out. They don't want business in that sense, because they don't know what they're doing. When it comes down to an OS, if you notice, they took this OS CD out of the box, they burn it onto a hard drive, which is the same hard drive you got your OS on, and then they say, oh no, as soon as you get it, take your CDs, burn a copy of your OS, and set it aside. And I told Bill Gates, you might as well just leave the recovery information there for a particular reason, and use encoding or programming to, when the system fails because it's being hacked, and it's called OS out front. So you'd have your firewall, then you'd have your OS out front, and then you'd have your recovery OS. So every time a system file would fail in your out front OS, it would automatically recover through its recovery OS that you're supposed to use a CD and burn, which works pretty good, but it also takes twice as amount of space off your hard drive. Now, I mean, does it really work? I'll tell you what, you can't back up Windows correctly, because every time you go to back up Windows and restore Windows, it will more than likely fight with you. It's kind of like trying to give a cat a bath. 1 minute it works, the next minute the cat's running out of the freaking bathroom because the cat doesn't want to work with you. And that's how their OS is in some senses. It's interesting because I think all they did was they took XP, put a fancy facework on it, put another NT layer tier against the BIOS, which is stupid because it's actually harder to delete BIOS in a hacker standpoint than it is to delete Windows files. So, I mean, I can delete everything in your BIOS except your boot up DIRs, directories, and your computer will still work. It's just that when it completely and utterly fails, if you don't have the recovery directories and or the recovery file that normally makes CDs, it just won't. It'll just flatline blue screen you, or it will require a shutdown and reset of the CMOS, because CMOS got corrupted. Which, if you ever notice that, the CMOS kind of up, and sometimes, especially in manufacturing environments, you'll see with Dell, you'll see with HP, you'll see with Acer, you'll see with Toshiba, you'll see with Apple, that little reset button for the CMOS or the reset for the motherboard does not always work either. I mean, I had Asus motherboards, $400 motherboards, and I sat there and hit the reset button because I'm overclocking out to 6.8 gigahertz on an i7, older i7 processor, non-cooled application, and running 65 Fahrenheit, which isn't bad for air cooling, because I didn't have a lot of, I had more fans than I had anything else. That was air cooled with the Consor processor being so-called liquid cooled. I want to say the Consor. Maybe you should actually open up and see if the liquid up and ran off, because when you shake it, you don't hear liquid. You should hear liquid in there, and that's kind of the funny part. Is it more of a dry vent, which does work, by the way, dry venting a processor, which is non-liquid cooled, where the heat just runs up through and out a radiator, and that's requires a fan to cool or make the heat dissipate out the backside of the computer. Normally means that you can't get the 30s and the 20s and the 10s on Fahrenheit you want. It will normally run right around 48 to 68. It is good in the sense of being good, but it's also bad in the sense of being bad. Because the console was asking how much liquid does it need to run a liquid cooled. Well, you need enough for the whole radiator, and you need enough for a single line to be filled. Or you usually bottom what's called a gravity fed liquid cooling, where you still got the electric pump on top of the processor, which is slightly a bad idea. Normally I put a pump in with a fan, heavier duty fan with a maybe a what they call a rubber band electric motor, so that your actual fan on your computer actually pumps through a belt, or it spins, and it spins the electric pump for the radiator to be cooled correctly, because the pump's no longer on the on top of the processor, which will heat up a processor, but it's actually back in part of a unit. It's a fan that cannot be removed off the radiator. Or you can make it removable, but it's a little bit more of a pain than it's worth, because it has to constantly be attached to a single line to pump directly into the radiator. So it has a line in, line out, and it's going into the radiator, circulating. Now, if you do a bottom side, you don't need to have both. You don't need to have as much liquid, but you need enough liquid for 3/4 of the radiator, if not the whole radiator, and a half line running to the processor, and that leaves enough air in the line, as some would refer, or empty void space, so that you can get a continuous flow without running your radiator dry. This is always the fun part, because I don't think Consular quite thought about what I was saying. Because I told him, I gave him two different versions. I gave him, the pump on top of the processor, but I told him it'd heat up probably about 20 degrees Fahrenheit, or 10 degrees Fahrenheit, and it wouldn't be as liquid cool, or it wouldn't be as hot either, but it'd be the processor and the pump fighting to get cooled down. The other way is sticking it on the radiator. Actually does work, because now the heat is being pulled out of the computer's processor and distributed correctly through the system. But how does this work? You need a slow running pump. It's kind of the one I built that works better than theirs. It's interesting, because I actually use radiator fluid on mine, and whatnot, because radiator fluid kind of attracts heat better than water. But at the same time, it makes a heck of a mess if you get it over. So, but the best one I've ever had is where I went down to Walmart, took best water cooled or cold air processor. Best one I ever had is I took a stand. You'll see free stands for motherboards, and not desktop enclosures, and not micro enclosures. It's just where you take the motherboard, you put it on a platform, you ground it out, and anyway, you go down and you buy this $99 refrigerator down at Walmart, and you open up the refrigerator. You look at the design with electricity, where all the wires are on the side of it. Anyway, you take the big old drill and you drill 2 holes in the side of it, and you actually get into, actually no, that's the wrong one. But anyway, that's if you're going to water cool it without having to use, that's a different one, but anyway, that's a different design. No, but anyway, yeah, you drill 1 hole out the side of it. Actually, no, 2 holes out the side of it. That was right. And you run your power cord in. You run all your USBs. So your power cord's running in through the top. Your USBs and anything you want to hook up is running in through the bottom. And this is if you really don't care what your computer looks like. I mean, if you really don't care and you just want flat out speed, you want to be able to overclock without killing your processor or motherboard, and still requires a fin on top of the processor. Anyway, you turn it so that it runs roughly right around 50 to 60 Fahrenheit in there, or 45 to 55 Fahrenheit, and you use everyone was asking me, how do you get rid of the moisture in the refrigerator? Well, simply I don't turn it up so that I mainly turn off the ice tray if it has an ice tray. But mainly, you don't get the one with the ice tray, you just get the refrigerator. And as your two holes are sitting there, on the one hole, you're going to use what I call a peacock, or you can actually go the other route, and that's where I got this guy to make me a circular fan that is made for a refrigerator. It's a snap 2 fan, and you put the one side of the fan on the outside, and then you stick the other part in, and when you stick the other part in, it draws cold air out of the refrigerator, but it only draws it out at a certain level. So in the summertime, it works perfectly. As far as the systems I've ran right around 0 Fahrenheit to negative 80 Fahrenheit, with this, turning them all the way down, and I mean, it just works so freaking good, it's pathetic. The other thing is you can use a dry moisture pack, where you take a pack and you throw it underneath, and any and all moisture gets pulled to this dry pack and whatnot. The biggest thing is you don't want to take it down below 38 degrees, because it'll start getting condensation, or it'll start freezing the board up with condensation. So you kind of got to go one way or the other. You're either going to run moderately to keep it at 0, or you're going to flat out just freeze the motherboard. If you freeze the motherboard, I warn you, there's a shock hazard to it. Running down to 32 Fahrenheit on the motherboard, it'll actually come around with a certain objective to that. But anyway, this enclosure, as it snaps to, it hovers over the motherboard, and it actually draws any and all type of heat away from the motherboard. Therefore, you can't make moisture because the heat's going outside of the refrigerator. It's a hooded design, and it works perfectly. Ran the i7 that way. The only big problem of it is it's a little bit more expensive, because when you run a 1,000-watt power pack and you run or even a 750 power pack and you're running a refrigerator, you tend to get a high electricity bill. The other thing of it was going through the Asus, what was it? It was the red Asus box. I can't think of the name, but I had a Bulldog processor, 8-core and an i7, and I ran both of them that way. And anyway, when you go to do a board swap, because I often did board swaps, you do overclocking. And as far as the Bulldog 8-core processor, I got it flat out at 18.9 gigahertz, running 32 Fahrenheit, and it was 0 Fahrenheit inside the refrigerator. Or, yeah. Yeah.